Hello to my Continental Style plucky friends. I'm doing this video for you on how to weave in your tails or loose ends as you go into your knitting without having them all hanging out until the end. This is a really simple style. I'll show you. It's also great for Fair Isle knitting when you're wanting to pick up the non-working yarn into floats that you're carrying along with you. Um, and I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. As you can see in my swatch, that there are a lot of ends that I've knit in here. Normally, there wouldn't be this much, but as I've been trying to get these videos done, I've retaped them several times, so my swatch is getting bigger and bigger, and lots of ends have been added in. The last few times I've just been carrying this Icy Audrey. This is a worsted weight that I'm using up the side of the knitting and just changing out the blue. I've used two contrasting colors here, Icy Audrey and Faded Ink in a sport weight yarn. But you can see how they're just all in there, and you can see over here some of the tails that I've cut off. I'll show you at the end how I do it. There's a couple of tails right there. So you can see how they're just all woven in, tucked in there, nice and secure. I've only got about 10, 12 stitches on the needle here. And so this looks a little messier because of that, the short amount, because I'm knitting in the ends all the way across the entire 12 stitches. But normally I would weave them in about 10 or 12 stitches, but then take into consideration that when you're working, you've probably got at least another 30, 40, 100, however many stitches that you're using in your project on there. So when you're thinking in terms of that the weave only takes up just a little bit of the beginning of your right side row that you're weaving them in, and so it doesn't show up even as much as this. And it works out really well. I've done it for a long time like this, and it saves you from keeping all those loose ends to the end. Everybody hates weaving those in at the end to finish up a project. You just do it right along with you. So I'm going to show you that. Let's get started. Again, this is Continental Style. So I've already come back across on the wrong side. You always want to introduce the new yarn or do the weave while you're knitting a right side row so that it is hidden on the wrong side row. If you're doing Fair Isle in the round, that's even better because you never see that wrong side. And you can weave those ends in as you're introducing them. Or like I said, you can use this exact same method to pick up a float of the color that you're not currently knitting with when you're using two colors in a row, which would be Fair Isle. So I've got my working yarn in my left hand like I normally would, and I'm going to show you this. I'm just going to introduce this Faded Ink back in. So when I do that, I usually just make a little loop. You can see the loop that I make here. If I get it over here, sorry, I'm probably making you dizzy. But I just have a loop. I'm just going to loop that, go into my stitch like I normally would. And then I just take that loop that I've made, and I just lay it right over the first stitch on the right hand needle like I normally would, and then just knit that. So that's my first stitch. And now I've got my working yarn that I will move into my left hand. And also another thing, which this is just extra, just so that you know, when you're introducing a color, you always have the yarn that you just have hanging out on the side. If say you have a main color that you're taking up the side of your knitting. Sydney, go lay down. My dog is wanting to come and say hello to you, and so he's sticking his head right on my lap and causing things to move around. So if it looks like I'm having an earthquake, I'm not. It's just my big dog being a little baby. But anyways, so I have the yarn that I'm just carrying up the side, the Icy Audrey. I'm just going to lay that over the new yarn that I'm introducing, and then that picks that yarn up so that it's where you need it. You do that on each right side row so that it's basically coming up the side with you, and there where you need it when you need to knit with it again. So I've got my first stitch made in the blue. So now here's my tail. I'm going to pull it out just a little bit longer than I normally would, just so you can get an idea. That's probably about 6 inches. I normally wouldn't leave a tail that long, but for our purposes, I'm going to do that. And then normally I just knit it into however many stitches it takes before the yarn slips out of my hand, which, you know, I try to at least get a good 10 stitches or so with that. So I've knit my first stitch. So now I'm going into the second stitch like I normally would. And let me get my right color of working yarn up here. I'm trying to knit the Icy Audrey. So I've got my working yarn, my dormant yarn over top of my working yarn just hanging out, my working yarn in my left hand like I normally would for Continental Style, and now I've got my tail in my right hand. I'm just hanging on to it, just looping it around. And before I actually knit the stitch, I have the needles in, so I'm bringing the tail from the right to the left, under and up over the right hand needle. I'm just letting it hang out there. Then I'm bringing my working yarn up over like I normally would, and now I'm unwrapping that tail and bringing it back down and then knitting the stitch like I normally would. And now I'm going to just knit this stitch because I only do that on every other stitch. So I'm knitting the next stitch. Now this is a weave stitch. So I've got the working yarn in my left hand. I'm coming from right to left, up under the right hand needle and over, just laying it in there between the two needles, bringing on my knit stitch and unwrapping the tail stitch. And now it's in there and secure, knitting the next stitch like I normally would. And this is a weave stitch. So basically what you're doing is wrap, knit, unwrap. This is a knit stitch. And you just wrap, knit, unwrap. And you can get into a really good rhythm with this. It doesn't ever slow my knitting down. I just keep going right along with it. That's a knit stitch. So again, just to reiterate, coming from the right to the left, up under the right hand needle and in between the right and left hand needle, letting that tail just hang out there. I've still got a hold of it. Bring my working yarn up like I normally would, and then unwrap the tail, knit the stitch like I normally would. And it's right in there. It's all nice and secure. It's in there hanging out. And you just do your next stitch like you normally would. This is a weave stitch. So again, wrap, knit, unwrap. And then this is a knit stitch. Knit it like I normally would. And then the last stitch, wrap. Oops, sorry, I came out of there. Wrap, knit, unwrap. And that's it. And there you have it. So now this is, I've got the stitches all along there. Here's my tail over here on the side waiting to get snipped off. And that's what I normally, a lot of times I'll just let it hang there, finish the round, and then at the end of the round, so that I'm not breaking my rhythm of knitting, I'll come back and just snip that stitch off. So I snip it relatively close, right up there. You know, pretty close to where it's ended up. And I'll just snip that off like I normally would. And then when I'm done, then I just kind of tug on the knitting a little bit and spread my stitches out a little bit, because then that allows it to kind of get to where it's going to be, and you can see how it kind of went into the next stitch there. I don't know if you can see that hanging out there, but that's what I like to do, because then it's in there pretty secure. If you're going along and then you come back and you notice that that's, say it slipped out of a couple of stitches, and now you've got the tail, you can see the tail, you know, a ½ inch sticking out now. You can just go back and snip that, and then it's probably not going to pull out anymore because you've got your knitting stretched back into your normal gauge and just hanging out there. So it stays in nice and secure, but that's why I like to go about 10 or 12 stitches, because if it slips out a couple of stitches, no big deal, snip it off and you're good to go. And like I said, this is really great for Fair Isle knitting when you're using two colors. Let me knit back across there and I'll just show you that real quick. And then that'll be it. And then that'll give you a little bit more opportunity to see how we weave that in. So I've got that Icy Audrey hanging out waiting for us over here when I get back to the right side. So I'm going to just knit back across real quickly here. And I'll just use both colors just for the fun of it, just to show you that. So when I'm knitting Fair Isle, this is kind of just a little bonus. Whatever the dominant color is, I usually keep in my left hand since I'm Continental Style. If you're an English style knitter and you're happy to watch this, whatever your dominant color would be, and a lot of times the patterns tell you what the dominant color is, or you just know the color that you're using more often, you would hold it in your right hand if you're English style. But for Continental Style, you're going to hold your dominant color, and I'm just going to pretend the Icy Audrey is my dominant color. So I'm going to hold that in my left hand like I normally would. And now I've got my non-dominant color in my left hand, and I'm just going to wrap it around. This is still attached. This is working yarn. So basically I have two working yarns in Fair Isle, one in each hand. So I'm just going to come up, and I'm going to use the Icy Audrey in the first stitch. So again, just like I showed you a minute ago, I'm going to lay this yarn that I want to be bringing along with me up on top of my dominant color or my working yarn. And then as I pull that working yarn over here and get it into position for me to knit with in my left hand, I've secured the blue yarn already, and it's just going to come along with me. So I'm going to knit this stitch. I'm going to just go 2 in. I usually knit like every 2 to 3 stitches, just depending on the pattern. Okay, so now I'm going to knit the blue, and I'm going to use, I want to bring the Icy Audrey along with me. So I'm just going to bring it up and over the opposite direction of what you would for when you're just knitting in the tail, because that's just going to lay there, and I'm going to knit English style with this working yarn and then unwrap that, and then I've secured that float, so it's going to bring Icy Audrey along with me. So let me just switch this up a little bit, and actually I'm going back. That might confuse you. Sorry, I don't know how to edit these, so you just have to go with the flow with me on all my goofy ideas that I have. All right, so now I'm going to knit back with the Icy Audrey, and I want to bring the blue along with me. So I'm going to bring it from, just like I did the last time, from right to left, up, under, knit my stitch like I normally would, and then unwrap it. And I'm going to use the Icy Audrey, and then I'm skipping a stitch, going in, and then again it's wrap, knit, unwrap. And so I'm just carrying that float right along with me. Going to knit a stitch, and going to wrap, knit, unwrap to carry the float. Okay, so now I'm going to do blue. So now I've come up to the blue, and I'm just going to knit like I normally would. Now I want to bring the Icy Audrey along with me in my Fair Isle, just assume. So you're going to come from the opposite direction. You're going to come from the left to the right, bringing it up between the needles, knit with this hand like you normally would, which would be considered English style, wrapping that up around on there, and then unwrapping the Icy Audrey, and you've got your Fair Isle stitch. I'm not going to go into that a lot of detail unless one of you wants me to. Just ask, and I can just concentrate on Fair Isle. But I just thought I'd throw that in there. And then so you've got both of your yarns over here where you need them to be. And if this was like a big Fair Isle sweater or some long stitch, then that's how you carry the opposite color, and it looks really nice and neat. Actually, when I do Fair Isle, my wrong side looks pretty neat. There's not a lot of floats, big long floats of yarn, because I usually do them every 2 stitches at the most, and carry them right along with me. It works out nice and neat, and you've got both of your colors that you're using right where you need them when you need them. So that was just a little extra bonus for you, and I hope that helps. If you have any questions, feel free to message me.